Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Great pleasure to talking to you today. In case that you wonder whether or not this talk about methodologies and scientific approach is important, I'll give you a couple of examples. So before I do that, my name is Frank Mitloehner. I'm at UC Davis, and I can tell you I'm pretty much at ground zero of a lot of the discussions that's held both in the state but also nationally and even internationally. I was intimately involved in the LEAP effort. In fact, I was the first chairman of LEAP, and I can tell you that this work is extremely important to the livestock sector, and I will tell you in a minute why. When was that, last year or so, I watched a show on TV, and the moderator said, and I quote, he said, if you drive a Prius and you eat one burger a week, then that's the same as driving a Hummer. I almost fell off the sofa hearing it. Of course, it's total baloney, right? We all know this. But, that's a person who wants to portray his anti-animal ag view and has done so in front of millions of people. Then you hear numbers of livestock contributing to more greenhouse gases in all transportation. Right? We all know the number 18%. Some people say livestock contributes up to 51% of all greenhouse gases produced in the United States, and globally even more. So the consumer is totally confused and is wondering what is going on with the impact of livestock on the environment. This industry and all the other livestock supply chains is tasked to come up with methodologies that are accepted globally, that are gold standard. And LEAP is one such methodology. I'll give you a couple of more examples here. One, if you wonder, is this really important to quantify greenhouse gases, or is this just an academic exercise? 2 weeks ago, the governor of California, Governor Brown, signed into law the first short-lived climate pollutant law, which is a law on methane emissions, saying that all of agriculture has to reduce methane emissions by 40%, 40% below 2013 levels. And this has to be accomplished by the year 2030. So now, of course, entire farming communities up in arms wondering, oh my gosh, what does that mean to me? What does that mean to my dairy or my feedlot or whatever I have? And what does that really mean below 2013 levels? Where was I with my farm or ranch in the year 2013? If I ask any of you, you would all say, I don't have a clue, right? So now I ask you, is it important for you to be able to quantify, to benchmark? I think so. Because otherwise, anybody can come up with whatever numbers they so choose and give you a black eye in no time. I think it is very important that we have globally harmonized methodologies so that everybody is assessed with the same approach and that there's no cherry picking going on. Extremely important in my view. I'll give you a few other examples here. Here on this slide you see 3 burgers. These 3 burgers show a tofu burger, a turkey burger, and a beef burger. And the 3 blue bubbles associated with these burgers are not the price tags, but they are the carbon footprints of these burgers. So the Swedish consumer buying at this fast food chain is interested in what the carbon footprint of their food choices are. That's not just something happening there. I'm a native from Germany. I can tell you there's a huge movement toward the vegan lifestyle in a place like Germany, which I thought was unthinkable when I grew up. This is Toyota, one of the largest car manufacturers, comparing the green image of their car versus that of a sheep. That all has to do with some very famous comparison of livestock producing more greenhouse gases than transportation, a claim that I don't support, but that is readily picked up by car manufacturers like Toyota. I think it is extremely important to your industry to get numbers right. Extremely important. I'm not saying that to you as an academician, because you would expect me to say that. But I'm saying that because I really think I understand how things work now internationally. And I think it is of vital importance to you. I'll give you another example of where these topics are not just an academic exercise, but become of practical importance really quickly. Bear with me because I'm going a little bit into chemistry now, okay? There are 3 greenhouse gases that we often talk about when talking about agriculture. CO2, what we exhale right now, methane, what's belched out of cow or coming from manure, and nitrous oxide. These three greenhouse gases differ with respect to their potency of being a greenhouse gas, of trapping heat that comes from the sun. So when the sun comes in and hits these three molecules, then methane hits that heat, stores that heat that's coming in from the sun 25 times better than CO2, and nitrous oxide traps it about 300 times better than CO2. And that's referred to as the global warming potential. The law I just quoted that was just signed into law in California uses not 25 as a global warming potential for methane, but it uses 70 to 80 times the global warming potential of CO2, saying methane is not comparable directly on a lifespan basis of 100 years, because methane doesn't exist for 100 years. The lifespan of a methane molecule is not 100 years or longer, it's only 12 years. And so, because of that, they use a global warming potential that's much higher than that's used when you find a factor of 25. That's a huge problem to the beef, to all kinds of ruminant animals, because if the factor goes up from 25 to 70 or 80, then that means everything releasing methane will be a major 800-pound gorilla with respect to greenhouse gas pollutants. So what's happening, for example, at Cowspiracy, this YouTube, what shall we call that? I don't even know what to call that, but it is something that's very, very popular among the young population, shared readily along the youth, and it depicts animal agriculture in a very, very negative light, saying livestock produces over 50% of all greenhouse gases. They use that global warming potential for methane of 70. So it is really important to understand what the whole biology, chemistry, physics behind this is, and to get the numbers right. You might wonder, well, what does an organization like the EPA that regulates air pollutants, water pollutants, greenhouse gases in the United States, what do they have to say about the relative importance of agriculture and of the livestock sector? This slide here shows on the x-axis the years 1990 to 2008. On the y-axis it shows total greenhouse gases released by all the different societal sectors. And what you see is that the EPA says that the great majority of greenhouse gases are associated with the use of fossil fuel. That's basically the transportation sector and energy production and use. Anytime you burn fossil fuel, you release carbon into the atmosphere. So the EPA, the official emission inventory for the United States, says energy fossil fuel using is the lion's share. The EPA also says how much comes from agriculture, namely 10%, around 10%. And the most recent number for animal agriculture is around 4%. It's a little more, but about 4%. So these are the numbers for the United States today. So if somebody tells you there's more greenhouse gas from livestock than from transportation, it's definitely not substantiated in a place like the United States. You can forget about that. Just go to the official emission inventory for the United States, which is depicted on the EPA webpage, and discuss facts from fiction. This slide here is a slide that shows why it's so important that we still, even though I believe the contributions are not as large as they are often portrayed by the anti-animal agriculture community, why the discussion is still very important. On the x-axis of this slide, you see the year 1750 to 2050. This is often depicted or often described as the 2050 challenge. We hear in 20 years we have 2 billion more people, but I like to put it in a different light. I tell people I'm in my 40s, and when I was little, we were here at 3.5 billion people. Today, we are at 7 billion people, and when I'm an old man, we will be at 9-point-something billion people on this planet. In other words, human population on this planet will have tripled throughout my lifetime, throughout your lifetime, tripled. But the natural resources to feed those people will not have tripled. We will not have 3 times more drinking water, 3 times more land, 3 times more fertilizer, 3 times more anything. But if anything, we will have less than what we had when I was a little boy. And what that means is that we have to make ethical choices as to how we produce food in this world. Shall we do what many people suggest, which is to go back to the red barn times, where we had 20 pigs or 50 pigs or 20 cows in a tie stall barn? Is that the way of sustainably producing food? Or shall we be intensified in the way we produce food? I have no doubt what the answer is. In fact, I think the worst thing we can do for sustainable food production is to go back where we were in the 1950s or 1960s, where nutrients were not managed, where nutrients went into the next creek, where cows were tied on to the next pole all day long, where they didn't walk around, where we didn't know very much about food security, food safety, where all of these sustainability indicators were not considered as much as they are today. I do not want to go back to the good old days, because I don't think they were that good. But I think that we have a huge problem in today's agriculture by not explaining appropriately what we do and why we do it. And we are leaving the field to the anti-animal agricultural activists who are doing a great job describing your business as resource depleting, as inhumane, as profit-oriented, and so on. And by and large, the voice of farming is not heard. So, as you can see on this slide here, I'm coming off my soapbox now. As you can see on this slide here, this increase in human population is mainly occurring in the developing world, not in the developed world, which is depicted in orange here. Now comes one of my favorite slides. It shows a satellite image of the world, and it shows a circle, and this circle here over Southeast Asia contains more people in it than the whole rest of the world combined. To me, that's a really important message, that there are certain areas in the world where the food security challenge will be really pronounced. More people in here than outside is just a very clear message. Another one is this one. Where will the increase in human population growth occur by the year 2050? Southeast Asia is what I just showed you, but Africa will grow even greater. That's not just by numbers, so more people, but it's also older people. People live longer lives. And as a result, there will be a massive increase in food demand. So how do we satisfy that increasing demand of food? That is really the question of the time. Consumption of all animal protein is increasing. It's increasing pretty drastically, particularly in the developing world. Eggs, meat, milk, everything is going up in demand. That's largely driven by incomes. I feel like a real multimedia guy here, going back and forth. On the x-axis here, you see the per capita national growth income in dollars. On the y-axis, the increase in meat consumption. You can see that if people have a lot of disposable income, they largely spend it, or they spend it when it comes to food, largely on animal protein-based diets. European countries are in the middle here. China is over here to the left, so currently not very high, but I have no doubt in my mind that in 10 years China will be pretty close to where the US is today. And once a nation with 1.4 billion people does that, then that shifts a lot around of what we know food supply chains are like today. This slide was taken from Livestock's Long Shadow, this FAO publication from 2006. It shows where in the world we have livestock. While you might think of us having a lot, think of India or China as having way, way larger herds. And when I say larger herds, I don't mean they're producing just necessarily way more commodities, but they have larger herds, oftentimes not very efficient. And that is very environmentally detrimental, and I will tell you in a minute why. This slide, I think, is a very important one. It shows where we have to make and why we have to make ethical choices. This is the only land here in color that is arable that we have available. And whether we have 3, 7, 9, or 12 billion people, that's the land we have to grow food. I love the depiction that Roger Cady made today with his piece of paper. I thought it was extremely powerful to show how little land we have available to feed this growing global population. And always keep in mind, the question arises, how do we feed these people? How do we produce that food? This slide here is one of the more important ones I will share with you. It shows the relationship between total greenhouse gas emissions on the y-axis and milk production on the x-axis. What it shows is that a cow that produces a little bit of milk because she's only fed slightly above her maintenance requirements, so a largely idle cow, produces a lot of greenhouse gases per unit of milk. The same is true for beef animals. The same is true for poultry. If you are fed at or above maintenance requirements, then everything that goes into a unit of production causes a lot of greenhouse gases. The more you produce per livestock unit of product, the relatively lower your environmental footprint, in this case, carbon footprint. And so what you would see here on the left side would be, that would be a cow in India, let's say, where she produces about 1,000 pounds per year, per cow per year. In the United States, it's 25 or so thousand pounds per year. So it takes about 20 to 25 cows in India to produce the same amount of milk as one cow here. So, and that's not the worst in the world. Many places, like places in Africa, are worse than that. This slide here shows that developing countries have a high, a strong increase in greenhouse gases over the years, compared to a plateauing in the developed world, in the developed countries. And the reason is that in the developed countries we have learned to become very efficient. We are increasing total amount of animal protein, but we have become very efficient, and therefore we are plateauing, we're stabilizing the amount of greenhouse gases. Whereas in the developing parts of the world, they're increasing supply, but increasing herd size. And that's not where we want to go globally. This slide comes from the FAO. It shows the carbon footprint of global dairy. It shows greenhouse gases on the y-axis and the regions on the x-axis. You can see here North America as relatively the lowest. Other places have much higher relative carbon footprints per unit of milk production. And what this really shows is that there's a huge amount of a huge improvement potential in large parts of the world that's currently untapped. If you ask the FAO and others as to what the main instruments are that we can use in order to fix or reduce our environmental footprint in animal protein production, it is four main tools. The one is improving reproductive efficiency. Second one is to improve veterinary care, a very important point. To improve genetics and to feed more energy-dense diets. The concert of those four main tools leads to a combined decrease in herd size. So, for example, if the Indian cow produces 1,000 pounds of milk per year, then one of the reasons is that she is loaded with endoparasites that consume a lot of the few nutrients that cow consumes. Because normally she's not fed a ration that's well balanced and that's formulated by some nutritionist or so, but she will eat whatever she finds when walking around, wherever she walks around. There's no real system behind feeding them to their highest potential. Veterinary care is lacking. Genetics is oftentimes inferior. Nutrition is lacking everywhere. And as a combined result, the herd sizes in countries like India or China or others are enormous. The number of animals they need to produce a given amount of product is outrageous. I'll show you a couple of trends from the US, and I contrast that with one example from China. In the US, in 1970, we had 140 million head of beef. Today, we have 90 million, so we have 50 million head of beef fewer now than we had 40 years ago, or 46 years ago. But even though we have so much fewer cattle today, we produce the same amount of beef. But with 50 million fewer cattle, that's 50 million cattle and associated enteric emissions, so that's belching, or waste produced by those animals, or water that's consumed, and so on, fewer than it was back then. And that's a huge improvement. On the dairy side, we have 9 million dairy cows today. We had 25 million dairy cows in 1950. Even though we have so much fewer cows today, we produce 60% more milk. That means our carbon footprint has decreased by 2/3. I teach a class in Davis with about 300 undergraduate students, and I asked them, how many dairy cows do we have in the United States? Some of them know it's about 9 million. They asked them, how many horses do we have in the United States? I said, don't know. 9.5 million horses. Have you ever heard anybody talk about carbon footprint of a horse? Or a dog or a cat? And if you haven't, then have you ever asked yourself why you haven't? How come that Peter and the others don't talk about the carbon footprint of these other species? And I don't mean to deflect from livestock. I'm just saying, why haven't you? The reason is that those organizations that make you believe that your livestock impact is so detrimental, they are trying to reach a certain clientele. And that clientele loves horses and dogs and cats, and they're completely ignorant about anybody else's environmental footprint because they're solely focusing on livestock. Now let's take a look at China. In China, you find half of the world's pigs produced. There are 50 million sows, each producing 20 piglets. And that means they are producing 1 billion pigs in China. So they have 1.4 billion people and 1 billion pigs competing for the same space, by the way. They're all around the eastern part of the country. Spent a lot of time in China. And I've seen a lot of swine farms in China. And I was shocked to see what I saw. But I was not shocked when I saw the following number. The official statistics for China is that they are losing 400 million pigs pre-weaning. They have a pre-weaning mortality of 40% in China. 40%. Imagine the amount of resources that go into 400 million pigs. They have more pigs dying pre-weaning than we produce in the United States combined. What did the Chinese do to overcome that issue? They bought Smithfield. Because they want to learn really fast how to do it in a way that we do it here. Ask yourself why. Ask yourself why a country like China does that. Because they know that they have to satisfy consumer demand, and they know that the way is not by going back to the 1950s, 1960s. They know they can't continue what they're doing currently. They know they have to become more intensified, and they are looking for the leader in the world on that issue. And that's a leader they find over here. That's why they have bought Smithfield, I believe. So what many people say today is that we need to not just intensify production, which we have done in this country, but we need to do something called sustainable intensification. We need to become more efficient worldwide, much more efficient in animal production, but we must not just be more efficient, we must be more efficient while also thinking of all the other sustainability indicators, including animal welfare, very important. We can't just be bigger and bigger and bigger and have more and more animals per farm or ranch or whatever, but we have to really keep animal welfare at a very high regard. We have to keep in mind food safety issues. There might not be that big a deal here in the United States anymore because we have very few outbreaks. But if you ask a Chinese consumer what their number one sustainability goal is, they will tell you food safety. So, animal welfare, food safety, worker health and safety, workers are the backbone of sustainability. If they are lacking in training or in job satisfaction, then we have a problem with sustainability along all lines. No question. No question. Food safety, number 4, and financial viability, number 5. Sustainable intensification, I think, is a key issue. What the FAO and others say today is this: production intensity and emission intensity are inversely related. When production per animal goes up, emissions per animal go down. So while we have made huge strides in the United States, in the developed world, in becoming more efficient, we are more efficient today per unit of product than we've ever been. While that's the case, if we grow the human population at the projected level, then that means we'll produce way more meat and other things. And if it's true that we need 70% more, then our total carbon footprint, environmental footprint will go up. Even though our efficiencies go, they are improved, we still go up. And we must not keep that, we must not forget about that. So livestock agriculture will always have an environmental footprint. We have to get it right. We have to be able to measure it in order to mitigate it. We have to share information, technologies, techniques with the rest of the world that's not as efficient as we are. And we have to engage the public with how we produce food today and why we do it the way we do it. And when people ask you how you grow your cattle or whatever you grow, don't send them away. Talk to them. You as a farmer are credible to the public at large. You must not be afraid of talking to them, or if you are, you need to be trained on how to do it right. But engage with them. I have many examples I can share as to where that's not happening, and that's basically allowing your enemies to win every battle. Because if you're not showing up, then they have won already.